privilege of being the CEO of the Shire of Coolgardie. So welcome to everybody. To this Shire of Coolgardie Cultural, Mental Health and Wellbeing conversation. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. And I pay my respect to elders, past, present and emerging. So welcome to the people here in the room and welcome to the people online. So I'd also like to acknowledge my Deputy Shire President, Tracy Rathbone. We also have Candy Chu, CEO of LG Professionals here. We have Francesca Lafonte and Blessings on our panel, and you'll hear from John Ravlick and also Alan Tranter. So Alan's been kind enough, I think he's in the UK, so I think at this time of the morning it's about 2 or 3 in the morning, so it's a great privilege to have him as well, and I suppose it's also showing the significance and importance of what we're talking about today. So the Shire of Coolgardie is known as the mother of the goldfields and encompasses an area of 30,400 kilometres. The Shire of Coolgardie includes the towns of Coolgardie, Kambalda, Widgiemoor and the Aboriginal community of Currawong. The Goldfields Esperance region supports approximately 31,000 jobs and produces an annual economic output of 21.6 billion. Mining is a key industry in the region, which accounts for 61% of output and 33% of all employment. And it's really interesting, I think, the significance of the Goldfields Esperance region and what's going on and the pressures we're all facing, both personally in the workplace. So outside of the Pilbara, we're the second biggest contributor to GDP to the state and to the federal government. Other important industries in the region are healthcare and social assistance, retail trade, and education and training. Coolgardie is the birthplace of the Great Gold Rush of 1892, when prospectors discovered 500 ounces of gold, and I think 500 ounces of gold, that was a lot at that time in 1892, and I think if I think about something like Goldfields and Ives at the moment, I think their target's around 340 or 350,000 ounces, 380, so there you go, thank you. And so that's just for one, so that's the significance of where we are, but that's 130 years on. This was the start of Coolgardie's rich mining history and growth. Coolgardie quickly became the 3rd largest town in Western Australia and the municipality following the gold rush. So it's interesting that Coolgardie became the 3rd largest town in WA. Today, the Shire of Coolgardie is the 3rd biggest contributor in the state to GDP. Outside of the Pilbara in terms of GDP, we're contributing something like $4 billion and anticipate with the mining expansion that to grow to 5 or 6 billion. I'm proud to host this important conversation on behalf of the Shire, and it is a conversation. It's a conversation about health and wellbeing, and hopefully in the conversation it will encourage and allow more people to feel that they can have the conversation. I'm passionate about the mental health of my staff, as well as the community we live in. Mental health and wellbeing is paramount in a remote community like ours, especially with the pressures and everything that we're facing. Whether you are here today in person or joining us via the live stream, I hope you enjoy the next couple of hours and find some takeaways for your organisation from today's conversations. And I just share a personal experience. Some 7 or 8 years ago, learning experience in local government, and I found myself, like others, in a really dark space. So, in a dark space, nobody to talk to, being treated like a leper, no one wanting to talk to you because supposedly I'd done something. And I don't think people really understand the significance of that and the impact it had on my family and the impact it had on my children, the impact it had on me. So I was in bed for 3 months, drinking myself silly, nearly committed suicide twice, and then my wife came along and said, "James, I'm going to kick you out of the house, you've got to get on with life." Okay, and what can we do, because the family and children and I need you. So I just share that experience, and I'm sure there's lots of conversations, and the reason I share that is hopefully it allows people to feel that if someone like myself as a CEO can stand up and share a story, that it's okay for anybody else to share a story. And unfortunately, you'll have to end up at the end with the gentleman I've been introduced to, John Ravlick, interviewing me on the couch, so I'm sure that'll be an interesting conversation. So I would now like to welcome John, who will be your MC for today's session. Thank you very much.
Good morning and welcome. And just on that note, this is a conversation around mental health and mental health issues and challenges that we're dealing with. Some of you might find the topic and the themes sensitive. Some of it might be disturbing to some of you, and some of it may be triggering for you. So please keep that in mind as we progress during the morning session. And obviously, if some of what we've said is triggering, I encourage you to seek appropriate support to make sure that that you've coped with what you're dealing with. 1892. I remember reading the history of Coolgardie, and I couldn't believe after the 500 ounces were found that there were 700 companies listed, mining companies listed on the London Stock Exchange, who were mining in the Coolgardie region. 700 companies were listed on the London Stock Exchange in 1892, and they were mining in Coolgardie. So that gives you an idea as to the reach and influence of the Shire of Coolgardie going back to 1892. James, thank you. It's a great opportunity and a privilege to be here. Thank you for that. I'm really looking forward to this morning's session. As you said, it really is a conversation, and it's really a start of a conversation that both local government and other organisations need to take on, both as employers but also as stewards of their communities that are responsible for the mental health and well-being of their communities. I'll make some opening remarks to set the scene for this morning's session. I'll then introduce Alan Tranter to talk to us about community aspects of mental health and wellbeing. I hope that Alan's online and he's good to go. I'm getting a thumbs up, so that's a good thing. After Alan, we'll then invite our panellists to join us on stage, and we'll then unpack a range of issues around mental health and wellbeing. And I understand we've got 3 participants in person and Blessings who will join us online. So I'm hoping that Blessings is online as well. I'm getting another thumbs up, so we've got 2 for 2. So we're going well. And then, as James has mentioned, I will finish today's session with by interviewing James about his approach to enabling corporate culture to deal with mental health and well-being at the Shire. So I'm not a mental health professional, so there's nothing that I'm going to say today that's going to help you if you do have mental health issues and challenges. But what I will do is talk about corporate culture and the importance of setting the right corporate culture and the right tone in the organisation that will enable the organisation, both as employers and employees, to deal and cope with mental health and wellbeing issues. I'm good to start if you guys want to put up the... I'll just try that. Excellent. Okay, so with burnout, anxiety and depression among workers hitting record levels, 3/4 of the US workforce experienced at least one symptom of mental health condition in the past year. While this is up on the year before, organisations are making mental health benefits more accessible and starting to have substantive discussions about how corporate culture affects employees' sense of well-being. Organisations are recognising it's time for a serious conversation about mental health in the workplace and the workplace culture. In recent years, we've seen high-profile singers, actors, cricketers, footballers, even Olympians increasingly speak out about their struggles with mental well-being. Our politicians are not immune to this either, as they deal with their own personal mental health issues and struggles. While all this activity is raising awareness that there are issues, there are mental health issues that people are dealing with, it's still a stigma in the workplace to admit that you are vulnerable and that you're dealing with mental health issues and challenges. We're still finding that workplaces are not investing in the whole being. We are investing in the physical, but we're not investing in the mental. There's a traditional view of the workplace. People are putting their lives on hold in order to come to work, and then they return to their lives after they knock off. Contemporary organisations are evolving. Their workplace models are enabling employees to bring their lives to work, because you don't stop being a human when you come to work. Employees shouldn't stop being human at work. For many, it's a positive thing. After all, being a human in the workplace will lead to significant empathy, which is a positive, particularly for those of us that are working in local government and that working with communities on a day-to-day basis. Mental health issues, including depression and anxiety, aren't new to the workplace. Workers have struggled forever to balance their mental health and well-being with the rigours of the job. In the past 2 years, the number of workers grappling with mental health issues has risen sharply. Feeling the prolonged stress and fatigue of the ongoing pandemic, employees became more comfortable admitting when they weren't okay. This helped them to normalise the conversation to some extent, because as soon as one employee says it, others were free to say it. This helped create a culture where people are now talking about mental health and well-being much more than in the past. The pandemic spawned anxiety, loneliness and heartbreak, and it'll be one of the topics that we'll throw to the panel during this morning's session. And people are still processing those issues. Even those lucky enough to work remotely have seen their hours increase as work blends into personal life. With remote work, we're losing track of when we're at work and when we're not. After our emails have spiked significantly following the various pandemic lockdowns. And in addition to morning and afternoon work peaks, there is now a third work peak which kicks in around 10 p.m. Most of us should be in bed at that hour of the night, not checking our emails. Employees discovered that productivity didn't take a nosedive during the pandemic lockdowns, when employees were forced to work from home. The pandemic forced many employers to rethink their relationship with employees, from their expectations for how, when and where work gets done to how they can boost employees' on-the-job satisfaction. There's no surprises that employers embraced this new hybrid workplace because it contributed to greater productivity and it enabled retention of talent. Sorry to all the miners in the room. Hybrid workplace doesn't exactly work for you, The main responsibility of leaders when it comes to mental health and all the health issues is to let employees know that they've got their back and they're there for them when employees are dealing with their issues and challenges. Leaders need to open up about mental health issues and challenges. It gives other team members permission to do the same. But this can only take place where there is trust in the workplace, where employees trust their peers and where employees trust their leaders. Again, this is one of the themes that we'll unpack with the panel this morning. As one entrepreneur said recently, when you look at business leaders, people follow confidence, but they are loyal to vulnerability. It's important for us to do well in our lives as well as to do well in business. Creating a culture that supports the workplace as a safe space is a win-win for both the employer and the employees. Creating an environment where employees feel safe and supported is a job for corporate culture. That includes creating a culture where people feel like they can bring their full selves to work. Managers need to demonstrate that they care about people's well-being. This may extend to the employee's family as well. When we are in the workplace, we're so much more than workers and employees. We're still daughters and sons. We're still fathers and mothers. Sisters and brothers. We come with considerable baggage and we come with considerable responsibility. If an employee can't function at work because they're having an issue at home, they can't deal with it, it's going to hurt your organisation. It could be an employee taking a call from the school about their child, or it could be a visit to the doctor with an elderly parent. Employees need to enable and invest more in the employees to preserve their productivity. The World Health Organization estimates that for every dollar we invest in treating depression and anxiety, it yields $4 in productivity gains. Failing to support employee mental health can be costly for employers. Productivity can suffer while talent exits. Investing in employees' mental health offers significant upside for employees. Many councils have invested in employee assistance programs which provide access to counselling along with other services. Employers need to move mental health from a benefits conversation to a cultural conversation. It's about rejecting the stigma and making people feel safe talking about their mental health needs, recognising that supporting mental health requires more than offering time off and leave. Culture of trust. Where there is no trust, mental health and broader health issues will never be dealt with. And the employer loses out due to the loss of productivity from unexplained absenteeism as employees try to resolve their issues without assistance or acceptance. An employee dropping a hammer on his toe will get prompt advice that he should get that looked at. Mental health issues are not dealt with in the same way. While bruising from mental health issues and challenges may not be visible, it doesn't mean they're not there. Thank you. I'll now ask Alan to give us his presentation. So some of you may know Alan Tranter, who's the founding director of Creating Communities. And when we invited our speakers to present today, we asked them what's their interest in mental health. Alan is very much about building the individual to be able to live rich lives and the importance of social connection to assist that occur. The role of community leaders and key organisations is ensuring that this is possible. I'd like to introduce you now to Alan Tranter. Good morning where you are, Alan. How are you going?
I'm extremely well, thank you, and greetings from the Mayfair Townhouse in downtown London, where it is about 3:20. And so I apologise for looking slightly disabled, but this is about the best I could do at this time of the day.
Thanks,
So
Alan.
as you can see from my title, I'm a great believer in community. I'm a great believer in connection. And what I hope to talk about today just simply shows a couple of the key points which makes this so true. So I'm trying to rip through some stuff fairly quickly, but I'm very happy if someone wants to ask any questions at any point in time. I also just want to echo James's acknowledgement of the ground on which you guys meet. The Aboriginal culture has got 60,000 years. The Poms think they're pretty good with a couple of thousand years. And we spent a bit of time in Oxford, but I think our First Nations people have got a culture which is far richer and deeper. So I just want to acknowledge that this morning. I just want to set a little bit of context, just in the same way that John was. I really recommend a guy called Jonathan Hayden to you, who's an American sociologist who's been writing for the last 30 years about the impact of our modern society on people. And particularly in the last decade, he's been talking about the impact of social media. And he often talks about the fact that 2012 was the second revolution of information after the invention of the Gutenberg press in the 1440s. And in an article recently in The Atlantic in April this year, and another one in the London Times last weekend, he talks about the fact that social media is actually breaking our society. And he talks about, in a number of his articles, he talks about what the impact is on young people. And it was really interesting in the article to do with The Atlantic, particularly after the shootings in Texas overnight, where I think 21 people were killed in a school. He compares the United States to Babel. And if anyone doesn't know the story of Babel in the Old Testament, ask Robert Hicks. He's the resident guru, I think, of the Old Testament in Coolgardie, Kambalda. But he says that he compares Babel to social media. And he says, we are disoriented, unable to speak the same language or recognise the same truth. We are cut off from one another and from the past. And that's creating enormous stress and tension, in addition to what John was talking about a moment ago. I just want to talk about a couple of things very quickly. There's a GP in the southwest of Western Australia who is deeply concerned about the number of young people she sees, teenagers, who are talking about loneliness, depression, suicidal tendencies, and suicide amongst their friends. And even though they might have several hundred or several thousand connections on Facebook, and they're being followed on Twitter and all the other things, they're getting posted on TikTok, they find that they've got no one they can trust to talk to, no one to support them, and they are feeling deeply isolated and depressed. The other really interesting area where there's been a lot of study is that in ageing. And it's so stunning to read some of the studies, which when I was asked the question, what do I think are the biggest impacts on health as people age, my mind immediately went to things like arthritis, heart attacks, smoking, drinking, and all the things which, as I approach 70, seem to be pretty clear in my mind. And so not smoking but drinking is something that I inflict upon myself. It was staggering to see that the second most important thing are the connections to family and friends. If you don't have connections to people you trust, and when I talk about trusted people, someone once described it as being able to ask someone for $50 and they'd give it to you without asking why. So that's that's an intimate relationship. But that's the second most important, and it's something like it affects the morbidity rate 10 times more than things like smoking and drinking. But the most important thing of all is incidental contact with people every day. So just going somewhere and having someone say, "G'day, James, how are you today?" and name you by name and know something about your past. And so they can talk to you personally. So when Bree started the Meals on Wheels, it's not just the delivery of food, it's the delivery of personal contact. And sometimes, for some people, the Meals on Wheels is the only person that they might have a face-to-face contact with that day. So our society has a plague called loneliness, and it's actually ripping our society apart. And as John Hayden would say, it's increased dramatically in the last decade because of the use of social media. And he actually talks about that the race for shares, likes and retweets has weaponized hatred and amplified the most extreme and aggressive voices. And it's isolating people more and more. He talks about each negative feed as being a dart to the heart. And that's what's happening in our society today. And it's interesting that he talks about the three most important structures of a successful democracy is social capital, and I'll talk about that in a tick, strong institutions and shared stories, and they are the things which are being destroyed. So just keep those things in mind. Can we understand community? Yes, we can. And we often talk about these four parts of the sociology of community. And I just really want to talk about social capital today, because social capital is the connection of people through networks. And it's the ability to have someone that you can talk to about something at any point in time. And it's also about those networks, that network you have through social capital being a trusted relationship, not just a surface tertiary, primary relationship where you know someone's name, but a relationship where you can ring people and have a chat with them, or just talk to them about what's going on deep in your heart. So it was great for James to talk about his wife today as someone who it was part of his social capital. Now, you might say everyone's got social capital, everyone's well networked, but I can tell you a really sad story about a guy that I know who's working in men's health, who, when he was with a group of guys in their 30s and 40s around a table talking about their networks, a number of the men said that they did not have one contact on their telephone. Not one. I've got something, and I've just purged my phone, and I've still got about 3,000 contacts on it. I'd eliminated everybody I hadn't spoken to for the last 3 or 4 years. Fancy not having one. You might say, oh, that's very unique. Now, there's a school in one of the suburbs we're working at, brand new suburb, brand new school. In that school, 52 different languages are spoken in the homes of those kids. And so that means that it's a fair chance that the 52 different language groups have come from different countries around the world to settle in Australia. I wonder what their social capital is. If something goes wrong in their family, who can they call? So it isn't just the isolated homeless person who suffers from lack of social capital. It's a great thing in our society today that people are isolated and separate. And if you look around your community and there is as is in most mining communities, amazing turnover of people coming through your towns. I know we're working in Headland. The Shire of Port Hedland, or the town of Port Hedland, has 49% staff turnover a year. In Broome, there's about a third of the non-Indigenous community leave the town every year. So there are new people coming into your communities every day without a network to survive. How important is it that we act in a manner which builds the networks of people that connects them into our communities so that they have support in the bad times, but even have connection with people in the good times? When we look at communities, we analyse it through what we call the intentional communities matrix. And that's the realms in which we live as individuals, in community, in the place that we live in, and in our endeavours. Now, it's so interesting that when we do an analysis of communities, that generally something like 95% of the services that are offered into communities by providers are either individual services to people or they're about things, about building stuff, our place. And yet our communities and our endeavour, the way that we get sense of purpose, are so important, and we tend to avoid them because they're really hard to deliver. And I want to talk about the need to talk about engagement as not a transaction but a connection. It's so important to move away from the notion of delivering entertainment to having people connected into delivering things. And transaction is an extrinsic motivation. It's the things on the outside. Is it good for, do I like it? Is it great? Is it the best thing I can do? Extrinsic motivation is often talked about wealth and fame, where intrinsic motivation is far more about getting a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, a sense of value in yourself from your connection with others. So often we think we're doing a great job because we're putting on a great event and people rock up to it. But if they sit on the rug by themselves or in a chair by themselves, don't build new connections with people, they will choose the best option they have at that moment to fill their time. If people are engaged in delivering at that point in time, if they are involved in doing it, then what you'll find, if they have such a strong connection that they will come no matter what else is going on in their lives, because they belong, they are connected into it. And so it's about moving from a place of disconnection to connection. It's about moving from alienation into being committed, to strive to be involved, from powerlessness to influence, and from stagnation to new learning. And that's the challenge that we have in our communities. Getting people to volunteer in Kambalda at the moment to be part of sporting and other groups is really hard. And I wonder if it's because of the disconnection that they're feeling rather than the connection that they're feeling. How do we move the way that we do things? We often talk about it's not what you do, but how do you do it? How do you engage people so that they believe they've got some influence, so they'll get involved? They're learning new things and are being challenged, so they'll get involved. You actually work with them so closely that they're totally committed to what your community is about, what their community is about, and they therefore get more and more involved. And this is another saying. My staff get sick of my little sayings at work, and I say over and over and over again, they think they've done a great thing. I say, if you've done it by yourself, you're wrong. And they go, oh, Alan, but all of these people rocked up and everyone said they had a great time. And I said, yes, and if you organise it next week and it's exactly the same thing, half the number of people rock up. But if you get them involved in doing it, then there's a fair chance that they'll come back next week. Another thing that we often do in new suburbs, we call them nappy valleys at times, is start mums and bubs groups. But after a very short period of time, we want them to become play groups organised by the mums themselves so that they're committed to it. And what we're finding is if we run mums and bubs for 6 weeks, that's where it finishes. But if we start forming a group to run it themselves, it goes on and on and on. There was a beautiful story that came out of one of the projects we're involved in the city of Rockingham recently, where we've been running coffee mornings for the I hate saying this, but seniors over 55s, because I'd be a senior member of the seniors if that was the category. And there were just these little coffee mornings, and people would say, "Why are you doing that?" And then when we restarted them again recently, one of the women came up to us and said, "Your coffee morning saved my life." And Kylie, who was there helping facilitate it, said, "Why?" And she said, "I live in this area just with my husband and I. My husband died, and I have had no support. And then later in the same year, my daughter died." Can you imagine that? Just before Christmas, her daughter died. And she said, "The people who had been at my coffee morning rallied round me. They provided me with all the support I needed, and they are now my best friends." And the people themselves came up to Kylie and said, "We were able to do something positive because we knew her well. If you do it by yourself, you are wrong." I'm not going to be talking about that today. Look, just going forward now, look, I really love working with the Shire of Coolgardie. It's one of the most progressive local governments that I know. And what we're doing at the moment is, all about ESG, this latest thing. We're trying to turn it on its head. So stay tuned to what the Shire of Coolgardie is doing, because we want to move ESG from being a reporting mechanism to a framework for internal excellence and external collaboration to achieve environmental and social outcomes. And that's so important, to work together to achieve the social outcomes which lead to collaboration, which lead to connection, which lead to people having sense of purpose in their life and moving forward. So the ultimate outcome, as John said in his introduction, is develop the skills, attributes and attitudes for people to live rich and full lives. Build people, get them involved in doing things, and then connect them together in community. We've lost the confidence to be involved. Build things back slowly, slowly, slowly. And the second point is so important. Almost every time you do something for a person or for people, you tend to be moving them and your community backwards. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. We need to be building the skills of people and connecting them together in community. So build people and build communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Don't go just yet. I'll just invite James to make a few remarks.
Thanks, Alan, for that. Alan was kind enough to dial in, as he said, from the UK. I was been lucky enough. Alan and I have known each other for a long time, and when I was in some dark places, he was there to talk to, and we have someone, and never judged, was always there to help me. So I'm deeply indebted and grateful to him for doing things, and now we're on a journey together where we can work in a community and make a difference. And Alan's certainly been engaged to revolutionise our community strategic plan. So people may know that local governments have to produce a community strategic plan, and it's in legislation. So Alan's turning it upside down, and we're reframing it, and I think it'll be something very exciting. And watch this space, because it'll be something that, with exactly what Alan's talked about, will talk about communities, connections and how we do things. So it won't be the old traditional way of doing things. But just thanks, Alan, for those things, and it is a conversation. And again, it was Alan's wisdom in terms of calling it a conversation. I was remiss a little bit earlier of not thanking MediaLink, so Glenn and the team and Chuck for helping us put this on and enabling people like Alan to dial in. So thank you, my friend, and I'm sure that there was a lot of things taken out of that by people. So thanks.
Alan, thank you. Feel free to go back to sleep if you like, or continue and participate. We'll take a couple of minutes now to get our panellists on stage and ready. So if you need to stand up and stretch and get a bit of movement, do so. So we'll just take a couple of minutes. So Candy, Tracy, Fran, could you join me on stage in your seats, please? So similar to Alan, we asked Candy, Fran and Tracy to let us know what is it about mental health and where's the interest come from. Tracy mentioned that her interest comes from empowering the lives touched by those with disability with inspiration, knowledge and support. Just confirm for me that we've got Blessings online as well. We'll just get Blessings to join us. Candy's the CEO of Local Government Professionals. She's also the chair of the Patricia Giles Centre for Non-Violence, and she's also the chair of the ECU Centre for Work and Wellbeing. And her interest in mental health comes from the fact that she's a registered psychologist with expertise in organisational psychology, particularly around workplace conflict, organisational culture and employee engagement. Candy delivered psychological services in a workplace setting for over 10 years, and her lived-in experience feeds into her own leadership style and leadership experience. Hi, Blessings. How are you going? Welcome.
Good morning, John. Not too bad, just a croaky voice and headache, but I think I'm all right.
Thank you for joining us in your condition. Thank you so much. So Blessings is the migrant employment and settlement advocate in the region, and her interest in mental health comes from or stems from her experience working with individuals who suffer from a range of ailments with the mental health within the mental health spectrum. She's experienced firsthand how mental health ailments can disable individuals and become a barrier to meaningful employment and socialisation. Francesca Lafanti. Francesca is a former local government chief executive officer and is currently the managing director at Millbridge Urban Planning and Business Solutions. And her interest in mental health comes from training and mentoring multidisciplinary teams and providing organisational support to enhance performance and relationships. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. What we'll do is we'll try and unpack some of the issues and challenges around mental health. And look, I'd love to start with the impact of COVID and what our communities have experienced. We saw that at the drop of a hat, we were forced into initially a national lockdown and then a range of lockdowns, which resulted in staff being told that they can't come to work, they need to work from home. And you can imagine the scramble that went on across the country, and not just our country, all countries, to enable that work to continue in the home. So while many of us got to experience remote working, and for some of us that was a positive, but for many that wasn't a positive. Blessings, would you like to talk about the sort of issues and challenges that people found when they were forced to work from home?
Okay, so most of my clients are from the refugee and humanitarian background, and having to work from home actually subjected them to family and domestic violence. And because they are isolated with the person who's abusing them, they didn't have anyone to turn to. And the violence escalated. But then again, considering their cultural background, most cultures, for culturally and linguistically diverse people, mental health illness is regarded as a stigma. So it is usually very hard for them to come out and express how they are feeling. And in some cultures, whatever they are feeling is regarded as normal. And having a husband beat up their wife is regarded as normal. But at least when they are going to work, they have that time that they are away from the abuser. COVID actually put them very closer to the abuser, and the abuse escalated. So after the lockdowns, we have seen quite an increase in the number of women who run away from their homes and seek shelter in the women's refugee, and the children get affected as well. So yeah, it's quite a big problem at the moment, and we are seeing the numbers increase day by day, even post isolation and lockdown.
Thanks, Blessings. Would one of the other panelists like to add any comments to that?
Is that on? Great. I think my comment would be in lockdown for most of us, and you talked already about the difference between the person and the workplace. For most people, the experience that I had and the experience that the people that I was in contact had was an initial one of fear. And that doesn't really matter what type of workplace you're in or what type of person you are or what role you're in that workplace. Most people got a sense of fear as to what did it mean for me. Immediately our response goes to our own personal lives. It ties directly into the conversations today about well-being and mental health. And then once we start processing ourselves, we're able to then to put on that hat of what does it look like in the workplace. As has already been indicated, the workplace is so much more than just going to work. It's a sense of purpose, it's a sense of financial stability. It provides a whole range of elements. So lockdown created that initial fear, which takes time for most people to process, including myself, and then you work through what does it look like. In that scramble, I think most people started from the point of a negative. But most of us found that actually through lockdown there was also a lot of positives. There was a global reframing of the workplace that without a pandemic wouldn't have occurred at the speed that it occurred nationally and internationally, that advanced so many other conversations that has enabled us to have the conversations we're having today in a positive light. We're seeing that the pandemic may have started as an initial hit for us, but it's actually turning out to be the starting of a much more positive conversation in moving forward.
Thanks, Fran. Candy, I'll call on you shortly. So what we also saw was that the breadwinners were at home, sometimes together with the family, sometimes with children, homeschooling, and you had a completely change of use in what is normally a home or a family home. Candy, any comments or?
Yeah, if I could, we were actually doing a what we call a management challenge, with a particular professional development activities that we do the last couple of days. And a couple of people yesterday made some really brave predictions that COVID is not going to be here forever. And I call them quite brave because judging by the last 3 years, it's still here, we're still talking about it. But certainly I distinctively remember that March 2020, when COVID first arrived in Australia and by extension WA, we just finished running one of our major conferences, our finance conference. And I remember on the Thursday, everyone was still there doing things and feeling all right about it. And then by sort of Friday morning, all of the exhibitors were packing up because they were being told by their head office as they've got to go, they can't be in crowded places anymore. And then obviously by the weekend, we all got told that we've got to stay at home and actually not WA at the time, but there was some very clear guidance around what not to do in crowded places, workplaces, and where people can or can't go, and all of that. I remember going back to work on the Monday, briefing the team around what we're going to do, and as an association, we do a lot of programs, and they were mainly in-person programs at the time, where there's training programs or conferences and all of that. I remember in the morning sort of briefing the team around what we were going to do and making decisions at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and by the time it was 9:15, it's changed again. By the time it was 10 o'clock, it's changed again. So I think particularly around that time, that uncertainty, particularly from an income perspective for a small organisation, and then by extension, what's going to happen to people's job security and all of that, I think it definitely played on people's mind. Obviously, in WA, we were incredibly fortunate for a couple of years that we were really good. I think we managed it really well. Obviously, not to discount the impact on hospitality industry, and quite a few people were suffering at the time. And certainly, I think at the time, local government was also dealing with the challenges around really deploying people in sort of community development positions and needing to go out to engage with people. You couldn't do that anymore at the time, sort of in person. But I think from our perspective, it was really interesting that constantly changing decision, I think certainly gave people a lot of uncertainty. But I think as a team, we really pulled together at that point in time, just looking at in that crisis what we're going to do, what is in the best interest of the organisation, but also what is in the best interest of our employees, and also just recognising that when you're dealing with something like this, you are not really just dealing with the person sitting in front of you, you're also dealing with what their families might be dealing with. I remember at that point in time, one of my employees told me that, my husband just lost his job because of whatever that might be. And so I wasn't just dealing with that person and their employment anymore with me. It's actually about thinking about more globally around what that person is going through and how else we can support them during that period of time. So that's particularly interesting. At that time as well, I was also the chair of the fantastic cat haven. I am a crazy cat lady. Very proud of it. And remember at that point in time, we were talking about as a charity organisation, we were essential services and needing to put people what would be perceived to be in a risky position to continue to provide that services. And local governments would be the same at the time. For those of you that are in essential services, looking at all of the risk, understanding what we're actually putting people in, and understanding decision makings on our part as a board, which is my position at the time. It was really interesting. It was really quite stressful. And I think for all of us, there wasn't really a playbook that we could read from and go, what did they do 5 years ago when that went through? We all had to just make it up as we go. And I think there were times, and I'll certainly be putting my hand up and say, I wasn't sure whether everything that I was doing at the time was correct, but you make the best judgment at the time with the information that you had. I just want to quickly touch on vaccination as well. I think when over the past couple of years, when COVID was at its peak globally, everyone thought that vaccine was the solution. Everyone thought that when that comes in, it will be all over, we can travel internationally again and everything will be open. I don't think many people actually thought about the resistance that a lot of people would have towards vaccination, and the fact that vaccination has tore a lot of families apart, and relationship apart, and the challenges that's being posed in the workplace. I think that was very much underestimated. And it's a difficult conversation for those of you who've had to have that conversations with people around you. It is a difficult conversation. So it's something that sort of COVID, in terms of the severity of the illness, we know that it's not as severe anymore as a couple of years ago when it first happened. But now the conversation actually moved to the impact of vaccination and what that means for you and people around you.
Thanks, Candy. Tracy, the home was changed overnight. It became a workplace, it became a school, it became a home, it became leisure and recreation. What sort of pressures did that create in the domestic setting?
So, from my perspective, John, which I would be inclined to believe would be the perspective from the majority of carers, leaders, professionals, because we all end up at home, I believe it was having to wear so many different hats under one roof. Like in my role as a long-term community member, in excess of 43 years in a community that I really love, and am very committed to not being able to be out and support the vulnerable. Like, we knew our families were safe in our homes. We did our best to continue and ensure our children learned that their values and their morals were still reinforced. We did our best. I know myself personally, there were times where I rang the mental health lines, not because I felt unsafe, but I needed to know that I was giving my son the best that I could, that I was supporting my daughter who lived in Queensland and my son and his family that lived in Port Lincoln, that we could support them and my grandchildren to the best way that I could, that a phone call or a Zoom meeting would support my neighbour because I couldn't go next door and talk to them. So we had to find ways to connect that were very much different to what we had before. And in this instance, social media didn't cut it, because usually in my world, I'm a touchy person, so I will hug. There's no need for words. There's no need for explanation. It's just a hug because you get it. COVID took that away. Behind the doors as an elected member in our homes, we were so concerned about our vulnerable, so concerned about those families that were isolated because they'd only recently relocated. And then we had the dynamic of families that were trying to relocate to our small community because their husbands couldn't come home because they needed an income. So on that level, John, I'm not sure if that addresses your topic, but I can only connect and feel in that space. And there's a lot of feeling in words that at times I really don't believe we have, because it comes from a place that's not emotive nor a mental, but it manifests itself through our mental reactions and responses.
Tracy and Blessings, I'll throw this one to you. So Alan talked about, in the community setting, the importance of building the person, and in turn you're building the community. Do you want to share with us what you've seen and potentially how that actually works, where either through your work at the Shire, you might have seen how the Shire has worked, and Alan mentioned the Meals on Wheels program, how those sort of programs would have built the individual, which then in turn builds the community?
So I would probably come from, or like to speak to the perspective of, as I'm hearing the word trust, I'm hearing the words relationships, I'm hearing the words connection, John. And I probably, in a broad sense, if I may, bring it back to a space where we really all need to pay a lot of attention progressively. That's our own recipe. How we do this is our own recipe, and we really need to discover that. But you need to be able to have an honest and comfortable and trusting relationship with yourself first. I believe that that's probably the greatest gift that anybody can give themselves if they're seeking a path to greater mental health. That being said, and I'll use the example of, I'm very aware that we had a great deal of resistance from some of our senior members when it came to accepting the support and the assistance of the Meals on Wheels. Now, respectfully, they come from a generation that did it tough. They were very resilient. And COVID presented them with not a world war, but indeed a challenge that was just as significant. And in that space, they went into what they know, which is put your head down, work hard, do your best, metaphorically through that period, whatever that period looked like. The more our staff offered that sincere connection as they met at that door, and I'll just backtrack a bit here because it actually began with a phone call. The Shire, as an organisation led by James, with conversations with key community representatives of the Shire that connected on those levels, had conversations around how can we protect our most vulnerable. And out of that came the check-in phone call. And then from there, the Meals on Wheels was developed. So seeing how challenging it was for our seniors and most vulnerable to adapt to that environment, and then bringing it out into a community space where, and I'll refer to a comment that Alan made, is that we're not meant to go solo. We're not meant to fly solo. No one's meant to fly solo at any given time. Whether we're learning, whether we're teaching, whether we're supporting, whether we're assisting is irrelevant. And helping our communities, as Alan has also indicated, to discover and learn is invaluable. And when it comes back to that intimate personal level, where that's supported, where a community member understands, or we personally understand that, you know what, I know your leg's broken. I've broken my arm before, so I can't relate to how uncomfortable and frustrating it may be for you at this moment while you're going through that process, but I can definitely relate because I couldn't eat my own meals. So there's where these connections lie within the community. There's where these connections lie within the people that we work side by side. And in that understanding of ourselves, we're not always going to be able to communicate that very well, but we need to at least honour ourselves enough to say, hey, like, you know, it's a bit bumpy for me at the minute. I'm not really sure how to navigate this. Like, I'm going to find my way, but it'd be really helpful if you could give me a little bit of understanding, just give me a bit of grace just for a minute while I figure it out. And when we're offering that room and supporting our community members, our colleagues, giving them the permission, because they need to validate that. We're not taught. We haven't been taught. It didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to change overnight. But we need to come back to a place where we give ourselves that permission to acknowledge that it's bumpy and that we're not going to get out of it quick, smart, that we're going to need help, that everybody's different and they're going to source different means for that. But please, anyone who's listening today, go and get it. Find your recipe, because your children are looking towards how you do this. You're educating the next generation. You're helping your parents to understand. You're going to be supporting your children or your grandchildren or your work colleague or your footy mates or the person at the Christmas tree that's getting overwhelmed because they've never been on a committee before and it's all new. Go and find out.
Thanks, Tracy. Blessings, are you there? Did you have something to contribute in terms of the community aspect? Oh, she's gone. I beg your pardon. Alan, are you still with us? Alan's gone too. Thank you. Okay. Candy, I mentioned bruising. You drop a hammer on your toe, the bruising is obvious, and the advice that you get is obvious. Go get that looked at. Bruising from a mental health event is not so obvious. How do we get the workplace ready so that we can understand what our peers may be going through, but more importantly, how do we know that they're going through stuff? How do we know that they may need support? What sort of things should we be looking for?
I half agree with you. I think definitely, a physical injury is a lot more obvious than the mental health concerns or injuries, but sometimes they can be quite obvious as well. So for people that are experiencing quite severe mental health conditions, their symptoms could be quite severe, hallucinating, and sort of those we're talking about fairly severe conditions. But I think for the general population, you've probably all heard about this statistic around sort of 1 in 5 people will experience depression at some point in their life, and same for anxiety as well. Those things, and I think a lot of people might put that down to stress, or that it might just be a one-off sort of situation, and most people are able to hide that quite well, particularly when they present at work. And I think I mentioned before that, a workplace is still a workplace, and boundaries to a lot of people is also quite important. a lot of people in workplaces, depending on where you are as well, they might also have a concern around how much do I actually show myself in the workplace without getting any repercussion, because there might be misunderstanding that I can't do my jobs if I have a mental health concerns, or other people might have preconceived notion around what a mental health conditions might be. So I think a lot of people do hide it really well. A lot of people don't actually recognize that what they're going through perhaps is not healthy, and they do need some help. So I think there's that recognition from the person in recognizing that they need some help, and there are lots of supports available. And I know that's only in the regions is a little bit more challenging, but there are lots of supports available. But also for other people, it's also recognizing that just because someone appears to be okay doesn't mean that they are. A lot of people out there with mental health concerns, they are often in very high functioning positions. And being the chair of Pet Jail Centre for Non-Violence, so we are the largest crisis accommodation providers in the Metro Northern Corridor, so sort of that Joondalup and Wanneroo way. A lot of our staff would tell us that it's not unusual for sort of high-flying professionals putting on their high heels, going down St George's Terrace and, you know, working their high-flying jobs during the day, and at night they've got nowhere to go back home to because they are at the refuge or they're dealing with something at home that they don't really know how to get out of. So just because that someone doesn't show it doesn't mean that they are not going through issues. And I think one of my favourite quotes is something along the lines of be kind to everyone because you never know what people are struggling with behind closed doors. So in terms of answering your question, John, I think it's very much around creating a workplace where people feel like that they can have that conversation. And I do think that it starts with the leader themselves around being comfortable in either having those conversations or receiving those conversations. So I have been for many years living with an eating disorder issue, and actually currently got a care team around me to monitor my progress. I've got a fantastic GP, I've got a fantastic dietitian, a fantastic psychologist that I'm seeing, and I'm really open about these things in terms of people seeing my diaries, where I'm going, and appointments that I've got, and all of that. But I think it does start with the leader sharing, and again, boundaries, but you know, same as if people have got cancer, you'll talk about it. If people have got sort of some kind of other issues, generally physically, you would talk about it. I don't see that any different being sort of mental health challenges. But also creating an environment and ensuring that people know that they can have that conversation either with you or with their peers around the place. And sometimes as a leader, we can be we can have an ego in thinking that people need to come and talk to you about it. And I think certainly one of the lessons that I've learned as a CEO, even though for a small organisation, is that don't overestimate how important you are. Most of the time, CEO is probably the least important person in the organisation. Most of the stuff is actually being done by the people in the front line and the people that actually do the work. So never overestimate how important you are, because most of the time you're probably not that important. But so recognizing that people might choose to talk to their peers, they might choose to talk to their colleagues around concerns that they've got. And I think as the leader, what you need to do is to ensure that people feel comfortable enough to have those conversations, and people have the skills in either raising the concerns with you, with consent from the person, or knowing that support is available through the organisation. You know, EAP, that I think as a small organisation, again, we don't have our own EAP services, but my staff do know that if they want that support, we can provide that. And I'd like to think that our organisation has amounts of people, we have that relationships where the request will be raised and there's no judgment being made. No unnecessary question will be asked, the support is there, and please use it. So yeah, I think that's my answer.
Thanks, Candy. Tracy, identifying the bruising. Have you had any experience? Have you?
So I would probably comment in that space, like, so I have had so many conversations around mental health with so many different people, culturally, professionally, in the community, family, and there's always been that perception that they just don't want to wake up. Like when we're talking about suicide, that they don't want to wake up, and in my understanding, as far as that aspect of mental health John, is that it usually comes with an exhaustion. It comes with an emotional exhaustion, a mental exhaustion, and we work very hard to be good parents, good work colleagues, and even though there may be times where we are steady, our colleagues may not be, so we shift from having our bruises that have healed to supporting those that are managing new bruises. And I believe that when we're trying to navigate our way through this, a lot of people are very reactive. Like a very, 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 very dear friend of mine once said to me, you can't have an emotion without a thought, and you definitely can't have a thought without an emotion. And in my world and in my space with our local government and all the amazing humans that I engage within on that level and outside of the Shire, I see there's a lot of reactive responses from communities and the people that they need to work with and engage with and what have you. And my take on that is that those people they're working with are actually suffering and managing with their own mental health issues on a day-to-day basis, however large, small, consistent, whatever level. You see, there's so many different layers to this. You can't actually just draw a line. And I'm listening to a lot of the commentary here today, and it does work around in and around the corporate space, but when we come back to being humans, it is far more diverse than that. So I relate to those bruises within myself because they can actually be what I would call triggers. When somebody's sort of like triggering something that I've healed from or am healing through, and choose not to be reactive because of that thought or that emotion that it's captured my trigger, and look to that person and say, oh my gosh, like, and I'll go back to the broken bone. I can see a broken bone there. I don't know what your story is. I'm not sure how it came about. I'm right here if you need to talk about it. And there have been times, and not my intention to let cats out of boxes, but in the past, not for some time, but in the past, I have had colleagues that have been in the administrative space that have shared their bruises. But then we come back to being humans. So I believe that in that space, in the corporate space, in the community space, especially in a community as such as ours, where everybody is so close, that those bruises touch us all in one way or another. So I believe that in those spaces, when we become humans, when we don't react to our past bruises and we can see clearly enough without that emotional response, we can acknowledge this person has a bruise and we may not know exactly how to help or what they need, but we can be there.
Tracy, thank you. We've got a few more minutes of the panel session, so I'll invite each of the panelists to make some concluding remarks. Then we'll break for a few minutes, give you a chance to stretch while we set up for the final session, which will be the interview with James Trail, the CEO of the Shire of Coolgardie. Candy, any final remarks, comments in terms of the discussion, the conversation that we've had today?
I think things like this are a fantastic initiative. So congratulations to the Shire of Coolgardie for putting something like this on. I know that we sort of talked a bit about sort of workplace mental health, but also community mental health as well. And the more we have this conversation, the easier it gets for people to actually understand what it is and be able to actually talk about it and then share the information. Like, you know, you don't see workplace putting on something like this talking about our leg muscles. Like, you know, I think one day when we don't have to do mental health conferences anymore, that will be the day when we're successful. So I think the more conversations we have around things like this, the better it is. And also just, you know, making it really casual, like in your conversation around just asking people, how are you? And actually mean it. I actually hate the question, how are you? Because it's kind of just what we do and what we say. Most people don't mean it, and most people don't have the time to actually stand there and go, you know what, I have a really terrible day, and rah, rah, rah. Nobody actually has time to listen to you. So I have a policy for myself that unless I've actually got time to listen to that person, I just don't ask how are you, because it's a meaningless question. So I probably encourage you to also do the same thing, or do whatever you like. But when you do have the time, when you do have the means to, ask people how are they, and really intently listen. Most of the time, you can't help. Most of the time, all you need to do is just be that person listening to someone else who is comfortable to share with you. As a psychologist, I've always found it as a privilege that people would sit there and tell me what's going on with them. So if you have that person who is comfortable with you and share their information with you, it's a privilege, and take it and respect that conversation. And also mental health, particularly in the workplace, if we're talking about that, it's not just the leader's responsibility, it's everyone else's responsibility as well. So much like workplace safety in the physical sense, mental health safety is also everyone's responsibility. So thanks for having me along today.
Thank you for being here. Thanks so much, Candy. Francesca.
For me, I think the concluding remark is going to be around balance, boundaries and layers. So what does that really mean? It means that, and I'll put it in the context of an experience that I had. Worked with a colleague who was at the time going through a particular life matter and started to essentially what we would call have a breakdown. Now, at the time, I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what it looked like, and I had no idea what my role in that space was. And as we moved through a journey that was for actually quite a long time, and this was a work colleague of mine, and that's the only relationship I had with the individual, and because of the roles that we had, it meant that I had a very strong working relationship in both time and in position. Now, when I look back and reflect on it, and it was really quite uncomfortable, I didn't understand the triggers. I didn't understand the signs, but I'm also not equipped to manage it. And I think in that conversation around balance, layers and boundaries, which all of the colleagues today have spoken about, it's really understanding that in a workplace, there are only some things you can do. You talk about banging your foot or breaking your leg. We can't actually mend it. We're not a doctor. When people have significant support needs around mental health, the workplace offers some support, but I think they're in that balance space. We need to recognise we're not the experts unless you have an expert on staff, and that attempting to be an expert can in fact trigger and create greater issues for an individual, and that one of the best things the organisation can do is to provide the contact points for someone who needs that help in the professional space. That's when I talk about balance. When I talk about boundaries, it's the same concept. What is our role in that space, and how do we work within that space? Having boundaries is important. Spending all of the day expecting to know and understand personal circumstances is not healthy for you as an individual and a colleague, and it's not healthy for the other. It's that balance in terms of what Candy referred to. The workplace has a workplace function and role. It's understanding that balance. And the last one is layers. There are so many layers to these elements that we're all on this journey of learning. So for me, mental health in the workplace is something we're all part of. We are all connected to it because we're all individual people. We all have hopes and aspirations, and we have feelings and concerns. But the workplace itself in that space, sometimes there's an expectation from either the individual or the others within the organisation, and many times, as Candy's already indicated, it's from others in the organisation that somehow there is a understanding that that support looks like it's kind of delving into the professional space. And therein lies those layers and boundaries and balance that I talk about. But mental health is very complex. Well-being is very diverse, and that understanding how we provide that in the workplace is part of the ongoing journey, but always recognising that workplace has a function and a role, that there are other support networks that need to be there, and some of those support networks are really way beyond the skill set of the workplace, and that the guidance that the workplace can provide is helping the individual tap into those other spaces. That's the first thing. And the second is that when we talk about mental health of the one person, that individual, there's also the mental health and the well-being of everybody else, because in the workplace, sometimes those that are trying to provide the support, it's of their nature to provide the support can actually get a level of unhealthy behaviours or their own stresses, because they don't know how they should be interacting. They don't know whether their role should be to provide greater support, less support. So again, I come back to those words of balance, boundaries and layers, and it's a journey that we're learning. And I think that that's really important in terms of managing and working within the workspace for mental health and wellbeing.
Thanks, Ryan. Tracy, would you like to provide some?
So I concur with both my colleagues here, and probably go into back to the personal space, to the relationship that we build with ourselves, and being able to find the recipe that works best for ourselves. And there's no right or wrong in this space. What is important is that we trust ourselves enough not to expect ourselves to fly solo, that you may not connect, and that word's come up quite frequently this morning, you may not connect with your supervisor, you may connect with another that works in an entirely different department. And again, as it's been reiterated, we're not professionals, none of us are, but we are very experienced in life and life circumstances. So you will find someone that can relate, that can be a support mechanism as you're discovering your recipe. And that takes a lot of courage and a lot of reflection. And at times it can appear to be even more challenging than what you're experiencing at the time. So I really encourage people to be graceful, to find that space in the day or within your 24 hours where you discover to start with what your self-care looks like. I meditate every morning. It is the very first thing that I do after I have a coffee. I sit quietly. I practice keeping my mind still, and it is not easy, but I can guarantee you after a year, I sort of like got a grip on it, and I've been doing it pretty much every day for the last 30 odd years. Now, that doesn't make me perfect. It doesn't make me a wonder at being a Zen master, but it definitely helps me tackle those moments where I have an emotion and a thought, or a thought and an emotion. So I am far less reactive, and in that moment when I'm in doubt, I don't. When I find I'm being challenged, or today I was full of butterflies, nervous as sitting up here, and I still am. However, I take a big breath, because I do it every morning when I meditate. I take a big breath and I put myself out there and discover something new. So today, that is my bit of grace. Today, that's my mindfulness. So I would challenge anyone in our organisation, and I believe, Mr. CEO, that this should be something that is most certainly encouraged and practiced as part of our mental health wellbeing within the Shire. That being said, I have my own little Tracy. Now, if I could, I would save the world. It is my nature. A life of service is what I give every day when I wake up. But I know I can't. So I do know that I can make a contribution. So today I'm making a contribution because I can't save the world. And my little Tracyism is that moments matter. Just like steady steps, they all come one at a time. And thank you, John.
Tracy, thank you so much. Please join with me in thanking the panellists for their contribution this morning. Thank you. Could I invite you to leave the stage so we can reset for our interview? Give us a couple of minutes and we'll be back to you shortly. Thank you. Welcome back. We'll now proceed with the final session for this morning, which will be the interview with Shire of Coolgardie CEO James Trail. James, you're a long-time local government CEO. You've come out of the metro area. You've landed in Coolgardie 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think it was 2016. So this is sort of in my 6th year here.
Tell us a little bit about what brought you to Coolgardie.
Thanks, John. Well, I was lucky enough to be working as a contractor and doing some consulting work, and the CEO's job came up at Coolgardie, and certainly at the time I had no ideas or intentions of doing that. I was from Perth, family based in Perth, and I was lucky enough for the council at the time to ask me whether I'd be interested in putting in for the job, and never really sort of crossed my mind. And then I thought, oh, okay, well, obviously it's going to be quite tough with my family being in Perth, and certainly one of the things I learned from a really good friend, rest in peace, Greggy Hadlow. I remember Greg saying, James, you've got to understand, if you're going to be a CEO in regional WA, you've got to live there. I said, oh, Greggy, you've got no idea what you're talking about, mate. He was dead right. And so I understood the importance of needing to be in the community to be effective as a leader in the community. And strangely enough, I had the conversation with the family and the girls. I've got my wife and 3 lovely daughters, and they said, Dad, have a crack at it. And I said, well, I'm not going to do that unless, you're with me, because that's I learned that the hard way, which I'll touch on a little bit later. And they said, well, Dad, if you put in for it, we'll come up here. So I was lucky enough to be given a second chance, and lucky enough to be given the opportunity by the Shire of Coolgardie. And at that stage, 12, 10 and 8, coming up here as a family, and it's something that I reflect on really proudly of coming here, because I don't think too many people could say, John, that 3, the family, complete family, uprooted from Perth, 3, 4, lucky enough to live with 4 wonderful ladies, and for them to come up here, and that's certainly something that I'm really proud of, that they came here and they grew up in this community. And I think that certainly is something that I'm really proud of, and it hurts me sometimes that there's some members in the community that don't understand that's the commitment that my family made and that we made to be invested in the community.
Thanks, James. 6 years is a long time. Prior to you, that would have seen 4 or 5 CEOs.
Yeah, I think we were having the conversation, a presentation to the councillors during my review, and I think I'm the 5th or 6th CEO within 7 years or something. So hopefully the tenure that I've served so far, and hopefully moving forward, has provided some consolidation here, and staff and the community and things, and being able to achieve things, because as we know, you can't achieve things when you've got so much change going on.
That's right. You've settled in, and you're working hard, and you're driving your council and your staff fairly hard with a view to leaving a legacy for Coolgardie and the community. That can't be taken lightly, and it's not easy. What sort of pressures are being created as a result of what you've embarked on with your various projects?
Thanks, John. It's lucky you're not asking my staff that question, because certainly we've got a lot of opportunity, and I think really exciting. Inadvertently, I've fallen in a space where we're going through a mining boom, and I think from memory, there wouldn't be very many local governments that have nickel, lithium,
gold and iron ore running in their local governments. So we've got an opportunity to work with industry and stakeholders to create a legacy. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, and listening to colleagues before, and they've all said, and all of them I've got a lot of respect for on things, is you can talk the talk, but you've got to walk the walk. And I think that's lost on a lot of things. So in terms of the pressures, we've got 3 major projects, a waste facility, a village in town and the airstrip, and that's created a lot of angst in the community in some areas. And, you know, in terms of why is that happening and what we're trying to do, to be able to work with the stakeholders, our major contributors to rates is, I think, 85% mining and contractors associated with it. And the opportunity to move a local government from roughly a revenue base of $12 or $13 million, rate base of about $8.5 million, to potentially move that to total revenue of $25 million within a year, and the opportunities that's going to potentially create for a community, what we can do in a community will, in working together and working with the council, will actually leave a legacy for the next 10 or 15 or 20 years. So being able to contribute to programs and activities. So there's a lot of pressure going on, and it's taking the opportunities that we've got to work with our stakeholders. So it's created pressure, and certainly creates pressure in the workplace. No question about that. Creates pressure in the community and creates pressure on the council. And I'm extremely lucky that at the pace we're moving, the reason we're able to do things and the reason I'm able to do things as a CEO is because the council trusts me. And it's really interesting listening to trust and things, because sometimes in a really regulated environment like we are, that, you know, trust, there's documentation, regulations and things, but to be able to move forward on that based on trust is pretty significant. So I'm really lucky.
Since you've arrived, you've been talking about the importance of culture. You've spent the last 6 years creating an enabling culture, a culture that emphasises accountability and performance. For 6 years we've talked about no surprises. For 6 years we've talked about no passengers. Why is setting the organisational culture so important for a small shire like Coolgardie?
Thanks, John. I think the importance of the organisational culture is you can't achieve anything if you don't have that right. And I remember, I go back to my days, Margaret River, but particularly when I moved to Kalamunda and things, and I've been lucky enough to have reached out to 3 or 4 people, including yourself, Andrew Hammond, Stephen Good, and Chris Adams as well, and learn a lot from talking to those people. And I think the journey I'd gone on and the lesson I learned at Kalamunda and doing some things was, when I started in things, to spend time understanding the culture, spend time understanding what the staff need, because you can put processes and systems in place, you can put technology in place, you can do all of that stuff. But if you don't have the people on the journey with you, and you don't know and understand where they're coming from, what they need, what they want, well then you can't achieve anything. And I can't achieve anything without them. And I know, you know, people sit there and think, oh yeah, here he goes again, he's talking about, you know, different things, and that's nonsense. But, you know, again, it comes back to, you know, walk the walk. And so spending time, and I was lucky enough by having those people, and fortunately I started off by having training. And I think, you know, panels and Alan and you talked about, once you understand yourself and you know how you operate and you know how you tick and you know what you're doing, you can then help and manage people within the organisation. So I give this example, you know, you manage and you set an organisation, set a culture up and things, and so, right, you know, I go, and some people like things, written instructions. Some people can deal with things verbally. Some people can deal with things without having a meeting. Some people need to have meetings. Now, at the end of the day, there's no point in me sitting there and saying, like if it was me, I don't like having to sit and write down things and have conversations. It's not having conversations, but let's get on with it. Go into someone's office and go bang, bang, drop it all on people, and then walk out of the office and expect people to understand what I've said and move forward. So by understanding me, that at the end of the day, it's my job to get the best out of those people, and some people like to sit down and have conversations, written and things. But I think in certain terms of setting the organisational culture, once people understand who I am, and you talk about vulnerability and different things, if people understand that I'm prepared to share things in the workplace, or I'm prepared to share things that I'm doing, things about potential in personal life and other things, then it builds trust within the organisation and things as well. So just in summary, I think it doesn't matter whether it's small or large, the culture in the organisation, if you don't have it right and you don't have the mechanisms to create a supportive culture that can operate and empower people and delegate to things, then you can't succeed, and you can't get anywhere and you can't succeed.
Yeah. And I guess as an extension of that, employees find it difficult to share their issues and challenges if they don't trust their peers and if they don't trust their managers. A lot of what you've tried to do over the last 6 months is build a culture where that enables that.
Yeah, and I think that stems from the trust that's built from the council to me. I'm very lucky that I work with a council that we can have robust conversations. And as you're aware, you have been, I think, been part of 3 CEO reviews now. 3 part of our reviews, and they're robust conversations. And so because it starts from that, we're able to share views and opinions. And as you know, from a trust perspective, I think not this review, but last one, I remember distinctly in that room there, and I was fired up, as you remember. And I walked in, and the deputy president shaking her head. Then I walked in, and I was ready for action, and I was ready to tell them what was going to happen and what was going to go on. And we managed to work our way through that, built on the respect and trust we had for each other. We got the outcome, and that's interesting around mental health and things, because I had a lot of things brewed up. And as a CEO, vulnerability, and when we get to that, it's a really interesting thing from a CEO's perspective. Should you show that? Can you show that? And what's the risks of showing that? So from a trust perspective, having people on the same page, and I think it was really interesting talking yesterday. We did a workshop with you with performance management and things, and talked to the team about it. And it's not something to be scared about, but the community has expectations on the council. The council's the custodians of their money. We're lucky enough to be working because we get paid through that, and the councils have to deliver on things, and so we have to deliver on things. So that balance between, and I think Candy articulated it really well, because there is that balance between work in the workplace, making decisions, a CEO being able to make decisions and sharing things, but at the end of the day, sometimes there's some tough decisions that need to be made. But if you're talking, you create a culture of trust, and people feel that they can talk, then that makes that journey a lot easier. And I just give this example. I think there wouldn't be very many CEOs that have agreed or have a situation where the HR manager who's employed by the CEO, and as we know, council only employs the CEO, the president has a direct line to the HR manager, and we have a policy in place to allow that. So as you build your culture, as you do surveys, we do an annual staff survey every year. That gets included in my performance reviews and conversations around that. So I think the trust, creating employees understanding where I'm coming from, but knowing that if there's some challenges and things, it's a safe place, and you can create a safe place where they can go to things, and if they're having problems with me or I'm running the organisation a certain way, they know they can go and have a conversation to my HR manager, and that gets relayed to the council. That's quite a unique thing, and I think that separates us in many ways about being able to create that two-way conversation, the trust that goes on. So it's actually quite unique, and I often think about it, and the pressure it also creates on my HR manager, given that she's employed by me, but she's having conversations with the council, which places her in an unenviable position. But fortunately, we've been together for 5 years, and we have a really trusting relationship together, and I understand that's important for the organisation.
Tell us a little bit about the importance of a safe and supportive workplace. Because at the end of the day, your employees are not going to share. They're not going to talk to you about the issues and challenges that they're experiencing if it's not a safe place. If they don't feel supported, they're not going to share any of that stuff. So how do you deal with that? How do you ensure that you do have a safe and supportive place where anybody can approach you within the organisation and expose whatever issues they may be dealing with?
Yeah, again, thanks, John. I think the only way that works and stuff is that, staff watch about how I act and my actions. So it's all around the leader's actions and my actions. So you can create a safe environment, you can talk about a safe environment, you can talk about it being supported, but that has to be demonstrated in how we behave and what we do. And so I certainly have an open door policy, and very rarely is my door closed. The only time it is closed if I've got a confidential conversation going on with the lawyers or something like that with the council. The staff know it's an open door, and they also know that they're able to go to the HR manager and know that information comes to me, but they also know they can come and have a conversation with me. And I think and I hope that they know and understand that if they have that conversation, that there's no ramifications in doing that. And I'll always have the conversation to say, have you talked to your supervisor, have you talked to your boss, have you talked around those things? But creating an environment where people can have direct access to me. And I know people say, in a big organisation you can't do that. And, I don't believe that. I was lucky enough to work in private practice in an organisation, and so I worked for the BGC group, and then Buckridge, who was the biggest builder and things, and had 1,600 employees, and every single day he drove to all his workplaces and walked around every single day. Now that's a $3.5 billion company. So if you invest in it and you take the time to do that and you do that, and you create the safe environment and people see the boss accessible and doing those things, then I believe they feel comfortable and they feel they're supported. So I think it's creating it. You can talk about it, but you have to demonstrate that in your actions. And also, it was really interesting, wasn't it, that somebody had the conversation and mentioned in our discussion yesterday, non-performers. And in a lot of organisations, you can't speak up about that, and if you do, you're condemned. And somebody asked what the question is and how do I deal with that? And you said, come and talk to us. Talk to the HR manager. If you're having challenges with another area in the organisation, come and talk to us. So you create that environment and allowing them to feel that they can do that without being condemned.
And it's so important for the remainder of the workplace that those issues of non-performance are dealt with.
Absolutely, John.
Having organisational leaders share their experience and challenges with mental health and health in general is important, because it gives others in the workplace permission to share their own experiences and challenges. Would you just like to elaborate a little bit on your own journey through vulnerability and how you support and give staff permission to share their own issues and challenges?
Yeah, thanks, John. I've written some notes down here for myself because it's certainly something that has been mentioned. I've written down, I heard, whole person, question mark, CEO, question mark, hide it, question mark, ring others and triple C, and I'll expand on that. And I just want to read something that resonates with me in terms of leadership and, and vulnerability. What does it mean to be a leader who leads from a place of humble privilege versus a place of perceived right? many leaders seem to forget that those leading others should be in reverence more than anything else. Being a leader means that you have been placed to serve others, and that's been talked about. Too often, I've seen leaders, and I've made the mistakes as well, seen leaders duck and cover, throw their people under the bus, throw their personal weight around, and instead of leading from a place of service, lead from a place of ego when things get rough or tough. And that vulnerability space is a really challenging one as part of that. So as a leader and a CEO, you're privileged to be in a position where you can direct, shape and focus people's potential to a specific result. When you were given the responsibility to lead, you were given an awesome opportunity to influence the lives of many people positively, a responsibility you should never take for granted. So that's something that, resonates with me on a regular basis. In talking about, a vulnerable journey, I touched on the base that, experienced something fairly significant 7 or 8 years ago in terms of being investigated by the CCC in terms of things. And, I made some mistakes, but certainly an experience of going through. And what was really interesting for me about vulnerable leadership was there was in a whole industry of 140 colleagues, there was 3 or 4 that would speak to me. Most of them treated me like a leper. They weren't interested in talking. They weren't interested in doing things. So of the risk of having a conversation with someone, we've talked about things, because when you're in that sort of place, in a dark place, you just want someone to talk to. You need somebody to talk to. And you have to have somebody to talk to. And reaching out, and I reached out to a number of people. And it's interesting, I've still kept a text on my phone. When was that? 2013. I've still kept a text on my phone where I text a colleague in local government who has been a long time and respected, and I respected and things, and text and said, I'm in a really dark place, can we talk? And he said, I'm away on holidays and when I get back I'll ring you. He's never rung me. That's 8 years ago. So a whole person and a CEO and hide it. I think the challenge of vulnerability as a CEO is sometimes if you show your vulnerability in the environment we work in, or in the environment that you do work in, it can be seen as a sign of weakness, but potentially an advantage can be taken of it. And I've experienced that. And so how do you get the balance between showing your feelings, expressing your feelings, and being vulnerable and understanding that you can be vulnerable, and the risks that potentially has? So, hiding it, being a whole person, and, have the conversation that in a community, am I James Trail or the CEO all the time? And who is James Trail? And some people, work and things, seeing things, and I think it's only through expressing your feelings, being vulnerable and showing things. And it was interesting, Tracy talked, the Deputy President, talking about giving people a hug. I mean, that's the same as I am. So, in the workplace, but be careful, can you hug people? Can't you hug people? All those sort of things going on in terms of different things. And I'm a person who, likes to have a hug and do things. And when you're upset, wanting to do that. So that's interesting about showing that vulnerability. And being a CEO is, I think that Alan talked about loneliness. It's a lonely place. It can be a really lonely place because the balance around who you can talk to, who you can trust, who you can have conversations with, and be leading the organisation through, the challenges you need to go through. So I think the journey going through, and I've questioned myself so many times about expressing feelings and vulnerability and things because of the experience I had. But I also know it's the right thing to do, because if you are, and I wear my heart on my sleeve, and if you do that, I think people see how genuine you are. And I think that helps in creating a safe environment, John, that by seeing that, understanding what it is and sharing things. And it's interesting because I made a commitment to myself, and I will, take this with me until I finish as a CEO, that when I reached out to people, or when I was in a really dark place, there was only 3 or 4 people who reached out to me. So I've made a commitment to myself that when I ever hear about any colleagues in any leadership position or anything that's happened, I don't judge them. I'm not interested in what happened. I've rung them and I've done that. There's been half a dozen people over the last 6 months that I've done that to, and sometimes they don't answer the phone, and it's just ringing to see how you are. I'm here, and I gave that commitment to myself because of the place I went through, and hopefully by doing that, it helps others understanding that it's okay, and that most of the time people just need someone to talk to. So yeah.
And interestingly, being in an isolated community, uprooting and moving the whole family to Coolgardie, it hasn't been easy on you or the family, and the community members haven't always been embracing and welcoming. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that, and what sort of support have you got in place to cope with some of the stuff that comes back at you?
Yeah, thanks, John. And I think you touched on it. We talked about it. You talked about sons and daughters, partners, wives. Very few people, other than a couple have been able to, and I'm very lucky that I've been able to share this with the council. Nobody has any idea. Very few people have any idea about the effect it's had on my family. Okay, seeing things, stuff in Facebook. People talked about darts to the heart, social media destroying community fabric, all of that. So people forget that I've got a family that is living in the community, and they're actually invested in the community, and they're working in the community. So they're not just, they're part of the fabric of the community. And it's really interesting because often what's also forgotten about is with the time that's going on, I spend more time at work and doing things and trying to make things happen than with my family. So when you read things and you see things, it's really hurtful, and it's really interesting because my girls have said, and now they're a little bit older, they understand that when I went through the challenges previously, they were too young, except my oldest daughter, she remembers, and I didn't realise the significant impact it's had on my oldest daughter. She remembers what happened, and she remembers the way I was, and I know that she's really proud now of getting back into local government and what I've been able to do, and seeing Dad being a CEO again, because it's something I'm really passionate about, and I love being in the industry. But the girls, I go home and they say, "Dad, yeah, look at all this stuff on Facebook again. What's going on? What you haven't done anything wrong. You're just doing your job, or you haven't been here for 2 weeks. You've been away. You've been in Perth. You've been over there. You've been to meetings and different things." So that really is really challenging, John, around what that is, because certain people you can share it with, but there's people in the community and people on Facebook, and they do things, and quite frankly, you're treated like a piece of meat, or and I've had people in the community saying, "Well, we pay your wages so we can say what we like," and you've got to do what it is, and imagine if I was saying those sort of things on Facebook about them and their families and different things. So that's really tough. How do you deal with it? I don't think there's any really easy way to deal with it. Certainly what I've done in the past is I've bottled it all up, and that's an absolute disaster, because you have to be able to, all of us, as you're going through challenges and you're doing things, you have to let your emotions out. And as you know, I'm lucky that I've got some people that I trust implicitly, and I'm able to reach out to them and ring them when I'm in a bad place. And as you know, was it a couple of weeks ago, mate, that I was struggling. I went to the doctor inadvertently to get some stuff. My heart was 170 over 90. And oh, it's okay, James is going to be okay and stuff, the pressure in the community, social media stuff. We're under an inquiry, investigation, because people are, you know, feeding information and whatever, and the fear of not being able to control those things. And all you're trying to do is do your job, and all you're trying to do is do your job to the best of your ability. But I was able to, you know, ring you and pull over the side of the road and have a cry and get my emotions out and, you know, do those sort of things and have conversations with people. So I think having a trusting environment and having people you can trust to help you, you know, do that. It was interesting, you know, Tracy was talking about things. You know, as part of that, certainly in the last 5 or 6 years, I've reached out to online forums, you know, Beyond Blue and other things, in terms of things. And, you know, the unpleasant stuff and the history. And it's really, really interesting that the only thing in the end, well, not the only thing, but the thing in the end that, you know, I got to the, you know, I saw the black dog twice, got really close, really, really close. And what was really interesting was the thought I had at the end of the day when I was about to do it was my girls and my wife, and not seeing the girls grow up and not being around to be their dad or their friend or the support mechanism, and that's what kept me going. So when I reflect on the challenges I face now, the environment I have at home, and, you know, it's the staff that I have would find this really amazing, that, you know, I'm a really easy person to work with and don't get grumpy and all those sort of things, and, you know, not very opinionated and all those sort of things anyway, but, you know, so I'm really lucky that I'm a pretty difficult person to live with. So, you know, my wife and my daughters and, you know, doing things, and I think in terms of how you deal with it, I keep thinking about the time when I had those spaces and I thought about my girls and growing up to be their dad, their friend, their provider, and support and things is the thing that keeps me, you know, moving and going through. I know probably if, you know, Gordana was sitting here, she'd say, that's a lot of nonsense and stuff. You don't do that at home and things. Part of the challenge is, you know, go home, you take those things at home, it gets taken out on them, all of those things, because, you know, an environment, that's a safe environment for me. It's the safest environment I've got. So, you know, in commenting about that, what supports do you have in place? You have to have some key people that you can talk to, that you trust implicitly, and I do. And, you know, I could say that the 3 or 4 of those people that I've shared things with them, that if it ever came out about what I've shared with them in my job or my role about, you know, doing things, nothing untoward, that, you know, there's a risk there that if that got out about, you know, James doing things, but you have to do it. You have to share your feelings, and I know for me and things, having gone on the journey that I have, that, you know, being vulnerable is okay, and you need to be able to express that, share things, you know, and trust people. And, you know, I finish in this space. You know, I'm a pretty old bloke now, 55, but I share this last thing around what's also helped me on the journey is that my daughters, my wife being European, and my girls have grown up Catholic schools and things, and, you know, believe very strongly in God. And in the journeys I've been through, you know, when you're brought up in traditional family home, Dad 77, 78, you know, I'm strong, we can do everything. You don't go to doctors, you don't do things, you don't talk to people, you don't do everything, everything's changed. And I remember when we were going through challenges and off the back of things, and I was still discovering myself after going through the challenge I did, and wanting to get back into an environment and things. And I remember us going to church together with the girls in Gordana, and it was 6 years ago this Easter. It was on a Sunday morning, and at the church there was you know, people being baptised. So it was a big stage, massive stage, church singing, 250 people there, and I'm sitting with the girls and the family, and some people got baptised, and all of a sudden they said, oh, if there's anybody else in the audience that wants to, please come forward. And Mate, I can't tell you what happened. This thing clicked on me. I got up, I walked out the back, went around and said to the priest, you know, I want to get baptised. And I went through, came out on stage, and, you know, everybody else had prepared things, and you had to say why and how you wanted to do. And I remember seeing the look on my little daughter, my youngest daughter's face, around being how proud she was in Dad, and the pain we'd been through, all of us working through things, and seeing the joy in her face around Dad being baptised and sharing, you know, their journey, was really special. And, you know, that's another thing that you come back to about remembering that. So, you know, I went across and things all the time now, but that was done. Something came over me, and the connection back to my family again, because I'd lost them. And I didn't know how to get them back again. And that was something, you know, God obviously, or somebody spoke to me, put something in, and discovering them. And there's no way in the world, if that had to happen, they wouldn't have come up here. And I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be in a good place, loving my job, enjoying it, in a community, supported by the council, if that hadn't happened. So I just, you know, sharing that story around things. So I think in finishing, two things, remembering those two important things for me around the family, even though I don't, you know, tell them enough and things, I think is the thing that helps me get through, John.
James, thank you so much for your honesty and your vulnerability. I think this is a good spot to conclude the session. Thank you so much for your attendance. I'll throw back to you shortly. What we'll do is James is going to make a few announcements in terms of what he and Shire will further consider. But look, thank you so much for your participation. Thank you so much for attending today. We hope that you've had some enlightening information come across which you can use in your own organisations. Thank you so much. James, do you want to finish up with?
Yeah, look, thanks, John. And so, look, I'd just really like to thank people, certainly to Bree and the team around organising things, to Media Link. Thanks, Glenn. You know, we had a conversation probably, you know, a couple of months ago, and it's certainly something that wanted to create an environment where it's not just talking about health and wellbeing and culture in a local government environment. We're living in a dynamic community. You know, it's the city of Kalgoorlie is our regional centre. There's so much going on. We're engaging with people, and all of our lives are so interconnected. You know, sport, communities, health, wellbeing, everything we're trying to do. And so it's so important for us to talk about things, share things, and keep working together. So, you know, thank you to you and your team for enabling us to bring together, so that we've got something that we can share and move forward. So I don't normally write a lot of things down to read out, and so please bear with me. But because this is so important, it's important that that I do. So a few years ago, the Shire, in conjunction with LGIS, introduced an employee assistance program. The Shire's EAP provides the following services to the community: counselling sessions, flu vaccination, skin care checks and health assessments. The Shire has a dual role as a major employee in a remote community and as a government of the last resort responsible for the health and wellbeing of its community. So the Shire will consider the health and wellbeing challenges of its employees and its community as we move forward to renew our employee assistance and wellbeing program. And I know the Deputy President talked about, you know, some things, and we're able to do this. And I think the example of the Meals on Wheels is a great example of something where we've worked with our stakeholders, Goldfields to Knives, and it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge them, and to certainly the GM Bevan Jones, and Annika being here has been an advocate of that, and thank you, because we've made a difference. We've saved 2 people's lives in the community. Now, that there's no better than that. You can't do anything better than that. And so that's come about from Breeze Passion, Meals on Wheels working together, the community working together, being funded jointly by the Shire and Goldfields St Ives. So thank you to them. And again, off the back of that, health and wellbeing conversations. And so we're going to be continuing and expanding on that. And so the council will consider in the budget the development and implementation of a health and wellbeing program for its employees and community, which will be made up of the following investment in employee and community health and wellbeing, mental health policy program, workplace champions, awareness and training sessions, personal health plans, and an annual community health and wellbeing forum. So they're things that we're going to take forward as initiatives in conversation with the will of the council, and I know they'll support on that because we've been talking about it. So hopefully that's our contribution and helps in moving forward. And, you know, my staff, the majority of them, all they do, they all live in this community. They're engaged in the community and things. And, you know, when things are going on and they see me being impacted or my family or the council or anything, it impacts on them. And I think people in the community forget that they are the people in the community and they're living here and working here, their children, their families, their partners working and all of those sort of things. So, you know, the strength we have around that and the links with our community, and hopefully by initiating this, having a conversation, and hopefully by, you know, maybe if it can make a difference in people seeing me as a leader of the organisation, being prepared to share our journey, my journey, what we're trying to do, and hopefully perhaps seeing some expression or vulnerability and things around it to say it's okay to have the conversation, it's okay to create a safe environment, and we need to do that and keep working together. So thank you, John, thank you everybody, and it's been a privilege to be part of this and bring this to everybody. So thanks very much.
Thanks, James.